Billionaire accused a black waitress of lying about her degree until she took out her badge, and everyone was shocked. She thought it was just another long shift at an upscale restaurant. Another night of pretending not to notice the way some customers looked at her skin before they looked at her name tag. But when one of the richest men in the city walked in, everything changed. In front of a packed dining room, he decided she was a liar, uneducated, unworthy of respect. He laughed at her dreams, mocked her degree, and tried to humiliate her. Seconds later, she reached into her bag, and the entire room fell silent. What was she hiding that turned fear into power? By day, Maya was exactly what she had worked years to become, a black woman with a criminal justice degree, a fresh detective's badge, and a spot in a department where people who looked like her were still considered rare. By night, she was something else entirely, a waitress in an upscale downtown restaurant, balancing trays for people who would never guess how many late nights and student loans it took for her to get where she was. The restaurant was polished marble, low lighting, and soft music. A place where powerful men made quiet deals over overpriced wine. For Maya, it was supposed to be temporary, just until the last of her debts were gone and her mother's medical bills were finally under control. Her badge stayed tucked in her bag, out of sight but never far from her thoughts. A silent reminder that she was more than the uniform and apron. Most nights felt the same. Forced smiles, subtle stares. The way some guests looked past her, as if she were invisible until they needed something. She had learned to swallow the comments, the assumptions, and the lingering question in their eyes about how someone like her ended up in a place like this. However, that night the energy felt different. A high-profile reservation, extra attention from management, whispers that one of the richest men in the city was coming in. As Maya tightened her apron and stepped onto the floor, she had no idea that this would be the last night anyone mistook her silence for weakness. He arrived the way powerful men often did in that restaurant, surrounded by quiet deference. The host straightened his tie, the manager smoothed his jacket, and servers whispered his name like it carried weight. To them, he was a billionaire investor, a man whose presence could make or break reputations. To Maya, at first, he was just another table assignment and another chance to get through the night without incident. However, from the moment she walked toward his table, she felt it. The pause, the slow, assessing stare that started at her skin, moved to her hair, then to her name tag, as if each detail confirmed something he already believed about her. His guests barely glanced her way. They were used to people like her being invisible. As the evening went on, the restaurant grew louder, but around his table, a different kind of noise gathered: low laughter, dismissive looks, the kind of amused curiosity that made her feel more like an object than a server. At some point, he must have overheard the manager casually mention her degree while bragging about how impressive his staff was. The billionaire's expression changed, not to respect, but to something closer to irritation. He began to study her more closely. Every time she approached, his eyes held the question he never bothered to hide. How could someone like her possibly have a criminal justice degree? The idea seemed to bother him, not because he doubted education, but because he doubted her right to it. The tension built in quiet, cutting ways-long looks, condescending smirks, exaggerated surprise whenever she remembered a detail or stayed calm under pressure. Soon, it stopped being subtle. He challenged her education in front of his table, then in front of nearby ones, turning private doubt into a public performance. He waved off the manager's attempt to smooth things over. In his version of the story, there had been too many lies from people in uniforms, too many fabricated credentials, too many frauds. A black waiter claiming a criminal justice degree was, to him, just another fraud waiting to be exposed. Phones began to appear, small black rectangles lifted just high enough to capture what was happening. Other guests pretended not to watch, but their eyes stayed locked on the unfolding scene. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed entertained. Maya could feel the ground shift beneath her, the room slowly dividing into those who believed her and those who never would, no matter what she said. The billionaire pushed harder. He insisted that if she really had that degree, she could easily prove it. He framed his suspicion as a matter of integrity, of principle, of wanting to protect the restaurant from liability. The manager, nervous and sweating, stopped standing next to Maya and began to stand closer to him. Under the bright, controlled lighting of that dining room, Maya felt every ugly layer of the situation pressing down on her. She was not just a waiter being questioned. She was a black woman being told in front of witnesses that her intelligence, her effort, and her achievements were inherently suspicious. The billionaire's tone hardened. He suggested she had lied on her application, that people like her sometimes embellished to get ahead, that businesses like this had to be careful. It was no longer an accusation hidden behind politeness. It was open, direct, meant to humiliate. The words were chosen to sound rational. The manager finally pulled her aside, not to defend her, but to warn her. The billionaire was important. His donations kept organizations funded, his influence reached far beyond those four walls, and a single complaint from him could cost her job. Maya was told to fix it, to reassure him, to put his mind at ease, even if it meant apologizing for something she had not done. Inside, rage and exhaustion simmered. She remembered academy lectures about staying composed under pressure, about not escalating situations, about how quickly things could turn deadly for someone who looked like her. She thought about her mother's medical bills, her dreams of making change from inside the system, her badge resting quietly in her bag like a secret she was not supposed to need tonight. Then the billionaire crossed a line. He hinted that, if she had lied about her degree, she might be lying about other things. He suggested that someone should check her bag, check her record, check whether she even belonged in the country, in the city, in that room. He motioned to security and made it clear he was prepared to call the police and report her for fraud. In that instant, the entire restaurant hovered on the edge of something irreversible. Security moved closer. Guests leaned in. Maya stood frozen between fear and fury, her hand inching toward her bag, knowing that whatever she decided to pull out next would change everything. Maya felt the weight of 100 eyes pressing into her back as she reached into her bag. For a split second, even she could hear the stories that haunted women like her stories, where any sudden movement became a justification, where any attempt to defend oneself became a threat. The billionaire watched with a smug certainty, expecting a flimsy excuse, a printed resume, some desperate attempt to appease him. Her fingers closed around cold metal. When she lifted her hand, it was not a napkin, not a phone, not the student ID he seemed to think was fake. It was a badge, real heavy, framed in the official seal of the very department he had threatened to involve. The room seemed to inhale at once. She placed it where everyone could see, under the soft glow of the restaurant lights. Security froze mid-step. The manager's forced smile collapsed into shock. A few guests who had been filming leaned forward, zooming in, trying to capture every detail. The gold caught the light, reflecting back not just authority, but years of sacrifice. Exams passed, obstacles endured. In a clear, steady tone, she identified herself, not as the girl from the floor, but as a recently promoted detective, assigned to work in criminal justice, trained in the very laws the billionaire claimed to care so much about. She laid out, without trembling, that her part-time job was a choice made for family and survival. The billionaire's expression shifted from amusement to disbelief, then to something darker in anger that came from realizing the narrative he had built was crumbling in front of witnesses. The man who prided himself on reading people, on spotting lies, had publicly tried to strip a black woman of her legitimacy, only to discover she held more official power than anyone in that room expected. Around them, the silence grew louder than any confrontation. The story he thought he was a rich man, exposing a fraud, had reversed in an instant. But the real fallout from that moment was only just beginning. The spell of silence finally broke in a wave of whispers, shuffling chairs, and a sudden shift in the room's energy. The same people who had watched passively as she was humiliated were now eager to be on the right side of the moment. Some nodded at her with sudden respect. Others looked away, ashamed of having believed the worst so quickly. The billionaire tried to recover, reaching for explanations and half-formed justifications, but the damage was done. His certainty had been shattered in front of cameras, and the footage was already leaving the room in dozens of hands. Security backed off. The manager stumbled through apologies, but even those felt misplaced, more afraid of fallout than remorseful about what she had endured. Later, the clip spread online. A black waiter, revealed as a detective, forced to flash her badge just to be treated as truthful. People argued in comments, debated intent, dissected tone. Some praised her composure. Others insisted the billionaire was just being cautious. Beneath it all, one truth pulsed. Her word, her degree, Her humanity had not been enough on their own. Maya went back to work at the department with a heavier understanding. She had thought the badge would be protection, a symbol that she had in some way broken through. Instead, she realized it was only seen as proof once she was under attack. Without it, to many, she was simply another black worker whose story could be dismissed. In the quiet after, she thought of all the people who never get the chance to prove themselves, who are never given the benefit of the doubt, whose lives cannot be redeemed by a single reveal. Her moment ended in shock and vindication. There's often end in silence, so the question lingers: why must black excellence be stamped, certified, and displayed before basic respect is given? How many more stories like hers will it take before that changes?